I feel as though I'm almost a little bit late to the party, but I guess there's no time like the present to talk about my favorite books of 2024 and to wrap up my reading. I was trying to think of my favorite books and I couldn't really narrow it down, so I'm very, very sorry that there's just a stack of a massive pile of books sitting in front of me and I don't really know where to begin. I know my favorite. I know books that I enjoyed but weren't necessarily the best books, and I know books that were the best, and so I sort of just thrown them in front of me and I'm going to pick them up and talk to them, talk to you about them, and I thought that's a start. I hope you had a beautiful year, a beautiful Christmas, and that you read a lot. In terms of my reading and my goals for reading, I didn't have a numerical goal this year, and I feel like I did a good job of not forcing myself to read for the number or to just like try and tick off a book a week. I did read a book a week. I read 60 books on the dot, and I feel like that was a good amount. I definitely didn't read as much as I could. There's been a few points in this year in which I've definitely fell into a little bit of a slump where I've read less, where I haven't been as inspired. I'm definitely in one of those slumps at the moment. My life's been changing a lot and I've found myself scrolling, as you probably have too, and for next year I have a few goals, but I feel like we can talk about them in another video. I do have a few more goals for reading and being more intentional, but that being said, I did read a lot of amazing books and I feel like I read more amazing books than not this year, and so it was so hard to narrow it down. I think I'm going to talk about like 15 or 20 books here today, so bear with me, but I guess we'll begin. This is Too Much and Not the Mood by Durga Chow Bose. This is an essay collection. I read this around June, and I actually sat with this slowly, which I'm glad that I did. This is, as I said, a collection of essays from Durga, and it reflects upon her life all the way from childhood to adulthood, and it meditates on what it means to be a writer, on what it means to be the daughter of immigrants, of what it means to be a woman, of what it means to be so many different things. And I think that's the beauty of it, that we're not just one thing, we're so many, and these essays do a beautiful job of commentating on that. It has some really beautiful lines. I haven't actually read a physical copy of this. I bought the physical copy after the fact. I read it on my Kindle whilst traveling through Europe. And I feel like this held me for the time and reassured me that I don't have to have it all figured out, which is a great thing. And so I really, really enjoyed this book, and you definitely should check it out if you love essay collections. This will be so up your street. There's also a beautiful podcast that goes in combination with this, with Lord at the New Zealand Writers Festival, which I thought was a nice addition. I also read this at the start of the year. This is Bonjour Tristesse by Francois Sagan. I feel like I've talked a lot about it, and I feel like you would have heard about it, but it's set in 1950s France, and it follows a young 17-year-old girl as she sabotages her father's marriage. It's set in the French Riviera. It's hot, it's sweaty, it's perpetually panicked, and I feel like it talks a lot about love and the complexity of relationships with those around us, especially in our teenage years. And this is a nice short read, and I'm glad to have finally read it. I read it in a day, in one sitting, and there's lots of beautiful lines in this also. I finished the Outline trilogy by Rachel Cusk. Cusk is getting to be one of my favorite writers. I feel like I almost want to finish all of her work in 2025, but for 2024 I finished the Outline trilogy, Transit and Kudos. I loved both, to be honest. I don't think I can pick a favorite. I read Transit in Australia in summer, and then I read Kudos in Europe in a European summer, and I feel like both hit me at the perfect time. They're following our protagonist as she, one, stays at home in London in the midst of her divorce with her children, and Transit, she travels again to teach writing, and if you haven't read any Rachel Cusk, I can't speak any more highly of her. I feel, if you like books where not a lot happens, but so much is said, then Rachel Cusk will definitely fill your hole. I was also kindly sent Shred Sisters by my beautiful friend Betsy Lerner. This is her first debut novel, and it's set in New York City, and it really transports you there, but it follows these two sisters who share this incredible bond, but are very different, and It comments on a lot of taboo topics in such an elegant way. For example, mental health is a major theme in this book, and it's a beautiful piece of fiction. It's refreshing, it's different, and it's very moving. And I really, really enjoyed this, and I'm glad that Betsy sent it to me. There's also a beautiful note on the inside, which I feel very lucky to have. Elena Ferrante is also an author that I began reading in 2024. I read The Days of Abandonment as well, which probably should be in my hands as well. But I really love Elena Ferrante, and I read My Brilliant Friend earlier in the year, and I don't think it spoke to me as much as I thought, but sitting in such a hot place in December, I read The Story of a New Name, and it really solidified my love for Elena Ferrante, her writing, and My Brilliant Friend as well. These books transport you to Italy, and it made me yearn for an Italian summer again, and so I want to go back ASAP. And it talks about the importance of sisterhood, about bonding, about reflection, about writing, about relationships, about so many things, and I really enjoyed these books so much, and I'm looking forward to continuing my Elena Ferrante kick in 2025. That will definitely be coming to me. A late addition for me is Who Killed My Father by Edouard Louis. This is my second Edouard Louis this year. I definitely don't recommend you read this first, but it's definitely my favorite of the two books I read from him this year. This is a vivid portrait of his relationship with his father. It talks about his father's childhood, about Edouard Louis' own personal childhood, and about how aspects of Edouard Louis' identity, such as his sexuality and his masculinity, or more so his femininity, affected his relationship with his father, and how small gestures and comments by his father have changed him and shaped him as a person. And it also talks a lot about forgiveness, which I thought was a beautiful addition, and about growing up in rural France in a lower socioeconomic area. And I really enjoyed this book. Also, do you like my mug? My dad bought me this set of mugs from his pottery teacher, and I think they're so cute. Now, definitely not my favorite, but I feel like there's a few books I want to mention. This, The Bee Sting, this is an Irish family saga drama. I read it in Europe. I really liked it. It's very, very long, and it follows a family as they are navigating a difficult period in their life, and it changes perspectives. And I really like this, although I do feel like the ending was a little bit abrupt. If you've read it, let me know. I feel like Paul Murray might have run out of his writer's advance or something, because the book literally just ends, and a book that takes so long to get to a point, when it gets to the point, it sort of just finishes it in like 2 pages, which I didn't really appreciate. But I wanted to mention this because the time that I was reading majority of it, I really did enjoy it. I also want to mention Evenings and Weekends by Osa McKenna. I don't have a copy of that. I'll put it on the screen. I really enjoyed that. It's set in London over the period of a few days, and it follows these friends as they're coming to terms with their late 20s. And I thought that was really beautiful. And also The Rachel Incident, which follows a girl and her best friend as they plan to get with a married professor. And it was just a really fun read, which I enjoyed. So I wanted to mention those as well. I've had to put my mug down because we're now on to my top 5 reads. This I'm counting as one. This is the Autobiographical Living series by Deborah Levy. And these books are fantabulous. This is Things I Don't Want to Know. This is probably my favorite. Then we have The Cost of Living and Real Estate. This is set in her 40s, this in her 50s, and this in her 60s. And it talks a lot about what it means to be a female artist and a mother moving throughout the world, and how this changes over the decades for her. This one more focuses on her childhood and is a reflection on a certain point in time as she's trying to work out who she is in terms of being an artist moving through the world. This talks a lot about her mother and her relationship with her mother, and how her not being one of the great writers affects her. It talks about her muses, and I really enjoyed this also. And then Real Estate is sort of just a collection of what it means to be at home, and where is home, and what family is, and how these all contribute to her life as a writer. And these books are so elegant. I think the covers as well, like everything from the typeface, to the margins, to the prose within them. I've underlined probably more in these books than any other book collection that I've read. And so if you're looking for a good new series to sink your teeth into in 2025, definitely check out Deborah Levy's autobiographical living series. I've read 8 Deborah Levy books this year, which is absolutely freaking crazy. But safe to say that she's probably one of my favorite authors at the moment. Devotions by Mary Oliver isn't a book that I read for the first time in 2024, but it's a book that continued to hold me in 2024, if that makes sense. I've read so many of these poems over and over again, and I tend to read them in the mornings. Mary Oliver, if you don't know, is probably one of the most respected poets of all time. She passed away sadly a few years ago, but she left behind this anthology and this selection of poems that she chose herself. I think it's got a beautiful cover. It's got a little bird on it drinking from a spoon. I don't know if it's honey. But these poems are about nature, but so much more. It's about our place in the world. And I actually got tattooed some wild geese because that's a very beautiful poem from this collection. And I just find myself returning to this all the time, and so it had to be in my at least top 5 or so, seeing as how much I read it. So I really enjoyed this again. I also was lucky enough to indulge in another Patti Smith, and this book holds a very special place in my heart, not only because of its contents, but because I have a signed copy of this dedicated to me. It says, "To Charlie, with all the good wishes, Patti." And when I received this book, it changed my life forever. Patti Smith is, if I had to pick a favorite author of all time, my favorite author. I feel so lucky to live in a world where she creates art and that we continually get access to her art every day through the form of a Substack and an Instagram, and she's very, very present. And I feel lucky to be connected to her, and Wool Gathering definitely spoke to me. There's so many beautiful meditations in this. All of the stories are true. They're stories from her childhood, from throughout her life, and it's interspersed with these beautiful images that she's taken. Oh, I'm sorry. And I think the cover's beautiful. The prose is magnificent. My copy that I have annotated obviously isn't this one, but it's this copy in particular I wanted to share with you because it's another thing that happened in 2024 that was a crazy moment. And so Wool Gathering by Patti Smith, one of my favorite Patti Smiths, and I loved it so much. Now, a late addition to the party on my favorites is The Position of Spoons and Other Intimacies by Deborah Levy. This is a new Deborah Levy. It was published in November. The cover, look at that, of course it's a Levy, exquisite. And the contents also exquisite. These are essays from the past few years. Some of these have been published already in certain literary magazines and online and such. But these are talking about what it means to be an artist, a writer. Again, I feel like you can see that common vein that runs through all the things that I consume. But I particularly liked this for the reasoning that it told me that I don't have to have it all figured out, that it's going to be okay, and that being an artist is valid, which I already knew, of course, but it's just a nice reminder. It also reminded me to remember that the beauty that I see in little everyday things, and that's a blessing in itself. And so I feel lucky to have read this in 2024, and if you haven't read it already, I urge you to do so. There's a few essays which I really liked. There's a few people that I really want to read after this, as in any Levy, Nelson, all these, you find so many things you want to read again. There was a particular story about Alice and the White Rabbit. It's sort of a retelling from Deborah Levy's perspective. It's called Migrations to Elsewhere and Other Pains, and it's a piece of dialogue shared between the White Rabbit and Alice in Wonderland as they talk about where elsewhere is, and it's sort of that idea of grass being greener on the other side, and where home is. And also Lemons at My Table was another essay which I really loved. So if you're going to read this, keep an eye out for those ones. Now we're finally at my favourite book of the year. This is My Work by Olga Round. I feel like I'm a broken record recommending this book. You're probably sick of me, but I also feel like it doesn't get enough mention here. And it has done the rounds on BookTube, not on TikTok at all. I've tried to make it prevalent there. But My Work is a piece of Danish fiction set in Stockholm, and it follows a mother in the aftermath and before the birth of her first child. It doesn't have a fixed timeline, but it sort of centers around childbirth as its like main altering hinging point. This book is refreshing, it's new, it's different, it's fragmentary, so it uses so many different forms to tell the story of this woman. It uses poetry, it uses prose, it uses letters, it uses journals, it uses just observations like a normal book, it uses hospital notes to tell the story of perpetual panic that this woman is going through, about her anxiety, about how she has to hold it together for her family, for her babies, but how she's so not okay. And we sort of are slowly trickle fed certain points throughout these multiple years to create this beautiful masterpiece that's so intricate. And I feel like this is an important book for anyone in their 20s, or just anyone in general, to read. And I think it talks about things that aren't often spoken about. Mothers are so often forced to be okay, to sacrifice for other people. And I feel like it needs to be talked about that that's not necessarily okay, and that mothers are too allowed to struggle and to feel. And I don't know, it's just an honest reflection, which I really, really enjoyed. I believe it's autofiction. I did read Olga Raun's other piece of work, The Employees, and I didn't like it at all, which is very interesting, but this spoke to me. I love the color, I love the cover, I love the colors, I love all the lines within it, and I definitely want to reread this eventually, but I ate it up so quickly. It honestly feels like a fever dream to me, but I feel so lucky to have read it. There are my favorite reads of 2024. As I said, a very, very good reading year. I feel like I've read so many of my favorite books this year, and I feel lucky to still be reading and to still be inspired. So I'm hoping 2025 is just as good, if not better. And let me know what your favorite book was of 2024 down below, and what you plan to read in the coming months, or some goals that you have. And I'll see you in the new year. I hope you're well, stay safe, and toodaloo.